Hi everyone, my name's Junkie, and today we're back on the Sandbox project going through another little thing that I found quite interesting. That was something quick that I implemented, and I'll try and show you quickly. It takes a while for it to load up, so I'll get the stuff ready whilst this is going on. But it's to do with the screen ratios. So having full screen is quite easy in GameMaker. There's just the built-in function, but having different resolutions and different ratios is kind of more tricky. So I'm going to go through how I did that in this video. So we'll just make it a new world. It doesn't really matter which one. But yeah, basically in my game you get this kind of option thing here. So full screen is obviously full screen. It's pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory, and it's pretty quick as well. Just crashed a little bit there, but yeah, it's pretty responsive, and as long as you don't go too quick between the two, it's all right. And then you got the aspect ratios, so that's what we're currently on. We can make it slightly different depending on which one we want. And then of course if we go full screen in that ratio, it looks a little bit odd. In fact, yeah, you can see it doesn't really like switching between the two. And yeah, the reason I decided to add this in was because originally it was in this ratio, 1:1. And I quite like that ratio. It was kind of nice and cool, but then whenever I did full screen it just never worked. Everything either looked stretched or had bars, or it didn't turn out well. So then I decided to add this ratio, which is full screen standard ratio. And then I went online, apparently 4:3 is also a common one in old monitors, and 16:10 I think is also kind of common. So yeah, I just added some more resolutions basically. Today we're going to be going through how I did that, and it's in HUD. Maybe it's not HUD then. Options menu, there it is. For some reason I've got a folder with just one object in. That's not good practice, but whatever. And yeah, it's just one object. It controls the whole options. So drop down equals false. That's the drop down so when you hover over it, it drops down and offers you a choice of options. Global options, I'm not entirely sure what that one is. So yeah, drop down, pretty simple. It may look kind of long and complicated, but effectively all this is doing is creating a drop down menu. So if we're hovering over it, then drop down equals true. If we're hovering over, if we're not hovering over it, and we were previously hovering over it, it says it's a false. And if we are, it keeps it as true. And if we close it, so options controls whether the whole thing's open or not. If we close it, then drop down goes back to false. So this is really a long, complicated way of controlling just when you hover over it. But you have to do it with relation to mouse and views, because obviously you're changing views. It gets a little bit complicated, but that's kind of the simple gist of it. And this is still kind of simple. So we'll go through it bit by bit. This is getting the middle of the screen. That's really simple. This is getting our X and Y coordinates in relation to the view, and this is checking whether our options menu is open, because of course all this has to happen only if it's open. So we've got one button, the main menu button. If we click on the main menu button, we restart the room. This is important because it means it clears any objects or instances that were there, and it just sets it back to what it was originally, which is quite useful. Not originally, but whatever the last save was, almost. And then it sets the room back to the main menu. Full screen again is relatively simple, as I said before. In GameMaker you can just use Windows set full screen and Windows get full screen. It's worth noting this did cause a few problems. I think it I was originally running in 30 FPS, and for some reason when you set it to full screen it decides it's going to run at 60 FPS. So yeah, I don't know why that did it, but now we're running at 60 FPS. Basically it just means I had to change a few numbers here and there, so with speed and stuff. Because of course you gotta remember, in GameMaker 60 FPS isn't always the desired amount, but yeah. And here we've got the ratios. So this is just checking which one we're hovered over. So is this all the if statements of that. If this is the important bit, if we're hovering over a certain one, we create an instance and it's called object resize. And what this does is it has these things, and then all it does is it sets a display equal to that ratio that we pass in. So here we've passed in 128,800, and then in this object what it does is it takes that and it uses in here. This I believe was a script I got from an external website, I can't remember where it is, but effectively it works in steps within a step event. That's kind of confusing, but all you've got to think of is that this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and if something goes wrong it defaults to this. Okay, that's kind of simple. It's not that hard to grasp, it's just something we've never really done before. So what it first does is it resets the display, and this is important because the only way you can reset a display or size is by resetting it first. You don't want to mess stuff up by having it a different display to start with. Then all we're doing is we're setting the window. That's pretty simple. We're just setting the border of the window. So I'll just show you what do you mean to do that. Okay. Look, so if our window is currently this in the height and this in the width along the bottom. So if we were to do that, we're extending the width. So it's literally just this, not what's being portrayed on the window, just the size of that window. So that's what we're doing first. Then we're setting it to full screen, because obviously we reset it here, so if it wasn't full screen before, then it needs to be set back to full screen. Most of the time this doesn't do anything because the rest of the program does it for it. And then we're actually resizing the surface. So this is meaning that before we were just changing this window, we're now changing what's actually inside the window to make sure it's the right size, and that's the application service. So that holds all the basically everything, but it holds the instances, the backgrounds, anything you've done, unless you've made your own surface to draw it on. So in the case of lighting, there is a separate surface for that. So that would need to be resized if you did change this. View is just setting our view within the room to be the right width and height, which is important, otherwise it would look kind of stretched if we didn't do that. And then we're setting the GUI. So the GUI, as I said before, the surface holds the instances, the backgrounds, and all that kind of stuff in the actual room. And then you've got to imagine the GUI is something layered on top of that. So it's a separate layer that draws after the application layer. And so we've got to do that one last, so that it's the last layer. And then script screen ratios, which this is a rather large script. I think this does almost the same as this, it just does it again. Okay. And it also changes the port as well. And yeah, the aspect ratios are to do with which it should do. So the aspect ratio is determined by dividing the width and the height, and I think this is something I came up with. I can't remember exactly, but basically all it's doing is it's using the things we passed in to think what is the desired ratio we wanted out of the 4. So yeah, you can see there it's 1.7 recurring. So if it's bigger than 1.7, it's got 1.7 recurring, then we're gonna set it to this ratio. If it's bigger than else, so we're getting smaller, else if it's bigger than 1.5 and therefore smaller than 1.7, then it's this. Apparently it's 1.6 exactly. And then yeah, this is my own resolution I added, which is just 1. That's the classic one. And then final resolution is just else. And that's the 4.3, I think. Yeah, 4.3. And then this is all to do with the weight and food, and that's kind of unimportant. And then, as I say, we'll just go over the default, because we've kind of gone through the whole of the screen resolution changing, so this just increments it. If it defaults, so if something goes terribly wrong, it sets the room back to the starting room. It creates the starting thing, which just effectively creates what we would at the start of the room. So it sets it to our starting room. This resets the room, and then destroys this instance. And that's really a last resort. I've never seen that happen, but if it would happen, what this does is it stops it from straight up erroring. It just goes back to the screen. I guess potentially you could also add in show the bug message or something here. Errored. But it stops it from creating a GameMaker error, which I've seen a few times pop up whilst I'm playing games made in GameMaker, and it's not great because it stops you from playing it, running it. At least this prevents that from happening. So yeah, that is how I go about screen ratios and full screen within my game. If you like this video, remember to like, subscribe, what else you guys want to do, and I'll talk to you in the next one.